So you have co-written, Reid, with ChatGPT 4, Impromptu: Amplifying Our Humanity Through AI. It's a really interesting book. I should level set my own self here. In VC world, they say that pessimists look smart and optimists get rich. I would be an outstanding tail risk management guy at a VC fund. I would be a terrible partner, because I walk into a room and I look around and I think, what's going to fall on my head? And you are a classic optimist, and you make a very, very good bull case for AI. And instead of me trying to sum it up, let me just put a quarter in the machine and let you give the audience your 30-second version of it.
So, and obviously we'll get into the details of kind of read some of your concerns. And so, then, by the way, the time concern is a good one, but it also could be turned into amplification. But here's the quick thing, which is the right way to think about artificial intelligence for the line of sight from where we are is it's amplification intelligence. It amplifies human abilities. And the moment that we're in is like a steam engine moment. Whereas the earlier steam engine gave us superpowers of muscles, so transport, construction, the entire thing that leads to the kind of industrial revolution and the progress that comes from that. Now we're at the steam engine of the mind. And this gives that kind of amplification across a wide number of tasks. And within 2 to 5 years, every professional activity, which is you process information and you do something with it, will have a personal intelligence that is a tool that helps you amplify that. It may not be the same one, it may be different ones for different cases, and not everyone will be exactly on. So like, for example, do I think within 2 to 5 years, a theoretical physicist will have a personal intelligence that will be helping, chart new physics? I think that's unlikely, very unlikely, kind of like, asteroid hits the Earth, kind of unlikely. But will that theoretical physicist have a tool that will help with grant writing and with, kind of other kinds of things that will give them more time to be giving thought to theoretical physics? The answer is yes. And so every professional will be having kind of tools to help them do that. And, part of the thing that I think that we, in kind of all the discussion of the risks, because, it's kind of, are the robots coming for us, kind of roughly, is actually as amplification intelligence. It's not just an amplifier of good people and good activities. Like, for example, I have a line of sight to every smartphone being a medical assistant and a tutor for every ages and everything, as kind of the thing that we want to get to everybody as fast as possible. But obviously it could be used by cyber criminals. It can be used by state actors. It could be these kind of things. And just like the steam engine, the workforce transformation is uncomfortable. And here's the simplest way that I can put the discomfort to people, which is, look, I get it. If you said you might be fired or you might get a raise, everyone goes, I'd rather stay exactly where I am, right? Because the two things in terms of where they are.
Human nature. Yeah.
Human nature. But the short answer is you say, look, if we're helping with the transition and all the rest, and your job's transitioning, and that does feel vertigo, does feel uncertain, if you look through like an amplification intelligence kind of company, and you say, well, sales, you 10x everybody, 10x amplifying, salespeople. It's like, well, great, we want more salespeople, we don't want less. Marketing people, you're going to want as much marketing as you before. Now you'll have a little bit less data entry and a little bit more conceptualization brand. Same thing in like, product development or legal or finance. Customer service will be more challenging because if you 10x customer service people and it's cost center, you'll probably go down to a 10th, and that's something where we need to have AI help us with the job transitions and other kinds of things. And maybe there will be some things that will be useful there, but it's a amplifier, and that amplification, while I think it's by and away largely the bull case, optimist as you mentioned, doesn't mean that there isn't things to navigate.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are plenty of places where it is glaringly obvious that AI can be almost nothing but a help. Medical is a big one. You talk about this in your book. There are places where it becomes a little hazy. And there are places where it's clear negative, right? Malicious coders using AI to write code, that sort of thing. The hazy stuff is the most interesting. I mean, I think about, you have a whole chapter on journalism. I refuse to ever even use a human intern because I feel like I can't trust them enough. And so it's hard for me to imagine using an AI in what I do. But more, it makes me nervous as a news consumer because plenty of people are going to be using AIs to help create journalism. Like that is, if that's not it's happening right now at the very worst level of journalism, like, content farm journalism. But a year from now, 2 years from now, I think it'll be, as you say, absolutely an accepted part. I think that it's going to be the way AI developed in chess. Like, remember, Deep Blue came and people thought, oh, when Deep Blue beat Kasparov, people thought, well, the machines are great. But then very quickly it became strong human players with strong AI co-pilots were actually even better than strong AI on its own. But I worry about how anybody can trust the AI enough. You talked about the hallucinations, and so that's what I want to push on a little bit here. Talk a little bit about what you call the hallucinations and how we get to a place where you can trust AI enough that it can provide good leverage to the work you're doing, rather than forcing you to go and reinvent the wheel every time you go to check what it's saying.
So 3 things in order. This first is, like, I wouldn't run these AI things autonomously today, right? I think that would be a mistake, right? And part of, again, the kind of impromptu universe of, person plus machine is to say, look, actually, there's ways we can adapt and then use the machine in various amplification ways. So if you, for example, ask, ChatGPT some specific questions about Reid Hoffman, it may make some assertions that are actually, in fact, false. I've done that exact exercise where it's had me believing things or inventing things that I didn't do. Like one person found that I think I was it's like, in ChatGPT said, he's a recipient of the Eisenhower Prize. I didn't even know what the Eisenhower Prize was. I had to go look it up.
Donald Trump gave that to himself, actually, a couple times.
Yes, exactly. And so like, that's one. But by the way, that doesn't, of course, obviate, like, I would recommend you use interns, and I recommend you use ChatGPT because, like, for example, one of the ways that I do it sometimes, think about arguments and so forth, is I go, okay, I load my argument in and I say, argue against this, right? Give me the kind of arguments of it. Doesn't mean that you trust that as a factual thing that, Reid Hoffman had the Eisenhower Prize, but the kind of conceptual creative framework, if you're getting the prompt stuff, kind of the right way, you can actually get really good things in collaboration. That was part of the arc of not just telling with impromptu, but showing. And, because I don't think there's going to be a lot of really interesting works that are going to be kind of dialogues, or at least anytime soon, between, person X, Reid, and ChatGPT, but I wanted to show the work as a way of kind of not just telling the message, but showing the message in terms of how you operate. The second thing is level of hallucination, which is, the hallucination stuff is improving. It's improving on a monthly basis, partially because, people like Microsoft with Bing and Google with Bard, so where they're bringing in search index and so where then they're bringing hallucination down. And so it's not at a fixed level. And there's various ways that's going forward. And then the third is the comparison of human hallucination versus machine hallucination, right? Because, sometimes
like
with this
mushrooms?
dialogue, well, that too, I don't know how many journalists are, the LSD type of journalists or peyote or whatever,
I know you said you didn't like the word and you gave a couple reasons why you didn't like the word hallucinations. I didn't like it because I was like, this sounds fun. I was like, this is a problem, not a positive. But anyway,
by the way, it relates to the positive because part of where this is a useful personal intelligence, kind of side is to play that foil to you. Actually, in fact, hallucinate, like you say, you argue against this, and sure, if like they give you 5 arguments and 2 of them are totally laughably bogus, but one of them was interesting, you hadn't heard that one before, and you want to scratch at that a little bit, it's better for increase in cognition and cognitive thinking. And so, like, for example, today, most people don't realize that if you had to pick between your average doctor reading an X-ray film and an AI reading an X-ray film, you'd rather have the AI. Now, of course, you'd rather have both, right? But, as per the chess point. But anyway, so that's I think the broad thing. Now, if you're just relying on the hallucination, and then the underlying point, of course, is, obviously people will use this to amplify content farms. We'll have a ton of it. It'll put more pressure on the assertion of truth and belief in the news media ecosystem. And obviously, one of the things, all of democracy, how we open up, is that problem. People that want confirmation belief, right? They want to say, I want to hear that Trump is assaulted by those evil liberals, and so therefore the indictment must be that, versus Actually, in fact, if you heard the FBI arresting a child molester, you'd be like, great.
Right. Or Hunter Biden today, for example.
Yeah,
We're
or
taping
for
this
example,
the day of the Hunter Biden.
Yes. And so, it's no, it's rule of law is the thing that matters. And so we will have to upgrade to all those because it's an amplifier. It's an amplifier of bad people, and there's a bunch of bad people who do tons of misinformation and tons of just cheap, whatever. And we're going to need to work on that all the more.
I want to pick at the democracy thing a little bit, and because I agree, all of your high-end, cool possibilities of AI, smart people using it as an assistant to improve their arguments, to get more information, totally agree. But for democracy to survive, we need not regular, averagely smart people like me, to not have it be used against them, right? To not be fooled by it. And I got to tell you, I suspect neither of you spend as much time as I do on TikTok, but I get tricked sometimes. I get tricked, right? Like, Reid, you do some dances, by news stuff, and I'm like, was that real? Was that not real? Now I can figure it out, right? Like, anytime I'm like, that doesn't, something seems a little off, I'll check. But that's not a great sign, because we're at the beginning of this AI. All this stuff, all the fake information is going to get better. And if you just look at this debate we're having this week with Robert Kennedy, out there, who has no facts on his side, going on Joe Rogan and having tons of people agree with him on this vaccine stuff, I worry about just seeing that on steroids, in an AI information world. And in your book, while I was encouraged by the positive examples of good things that could come from it, I was not so convinced by your arguments for how we combat that. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
So, part of the reason I may not have been as convincing is because I don't think we're there yet on the defense. Like, we need to get there. So I wasn't arguing. It's like nothing to worry about here. It was something to worry about. We need to set up against it.
Fair.
Now, part of it is what I try to get people to understand is that the future, as we develop this stuff, is safer than the now. Because, for example, imagine that you say whatever your particular assault on our cognition, average person cognition, whatever, is, say, it's kind of coming through, kind of a browser equivalent of a media. And say that you had AIs, running that were kind of like, kind of the equivalent of fact checker kind of AIs. And someone says, vaccines are an evil plot to chip your children, right? And it goes, okay, well, here are the institutions that you can get the facts from. It's the same people, by the way, that provide you medical care, have caused you to have, that over the last decades have increased our average, kind of life, have navigated, kind of a set of things like, kind of curing smallpox and a bunch of other stuff. And here's the facts. And they can help you with that because they can intercept. Like, you go, well, I worry about AIs having a deep fake voice where they kind of like, it's my child calling me, and it says, the AI interrupts on your phone and says, hey, this could be a deep fake thing. Ask your kid something that only you and your kid know, right? In order to cross-check, right, this. And so the future evolution of the technology is a way to try to solve whatever specific misinformation problem that you're looking at. Now, that's true, but I don't mean it to sound easy, because obviously we have to kind of get to what kind of fact-checking AI are we going to call it 80% of society agree with? You're never going to get to 95% because, 10+% is going to be, Ted Kaczynski-ish, right? So It's kind of like, I don't mean they're going to be Ted Kaczynski. He's the one, but they're going to be like, oh no, like all these institutions, like the Earth is still flat, and people are just trying to.
But you can imagine the Elons and the Joe Rogans of the world, your friend, pushing back. You already see that now, like pushing back on that and saying, oh well, you can't trust those institutions, right? And like you should trust. And I have now all the other tools I can use to advance, the truth about Paul Pelosi's gay lover or whatever.
Yes, exactly. Look, the short answer is, and I argue very strongly, it's what you have to be doing is working on improving the institution. So the usual argument that people make trying to use like, oh, look, the institution failed here. It's untrustworthy. It's like, oh, look, a doctor did a misdiagnosis. Don't listen to doctors. Like, oh my God, is that bad reasoning? And so you got to go, whatever the level of emotion and fear about that one thing. And it's like, we all need to say, how do we collectively improve the institutions? I mean, for example, part of what I've gotten out of discussion with conservative friends is I have an ear now to where where, call it mainstream media, does have some interesting biases that irritate the conservatives justly. And I was like, oh, and I've now kind of learned to do that because you listen and you go, okay, I get it. There's some biases here. That doesn't mean that everything that comes out of their mouth is wrong.
Right.
I mean, it's a terrible, terrible piece of reasoning. This is where you could tell that people are being motivated by emotion, not by reason, because otherwise you're smart. You should be able to understand that. Like, for example, institutions are how we determine truth. It's how we build science. It's not that every scientist is somehow a genius and a truth teller. It's that the institution of the practice of how we do it is how we make progress. Think about that when you get in your car. Without science, there's no cars, right? So we have to be focused on how do we improve those institutions, and failure points don't invalidate the whole institution. It just says there's more that we need to do to be improving them.
I know we got to start moving on. I do have one thing I want to push on here. There is a level of part of what you're talking about, people using emotion and not rationality. That's possible when you live in a world without real consequences for using emotional and not rationality. And one of the things we have now is a world where basically you can walk around saying the earth is flat and, or that lizard people are running the Illuminati lizard people are running the government. There are no consequences for that anymore. Like socially or professionally, it's just like, yeah, you do you. You believe in QAnon, that's fine. You can be elected to Congress. And I don't know, that to me speaks of like larger societal decadence. And I wonder how a decadent society self-corrects on this.
Well, it's one of the things that I've been particularly irritated by the MAGA folks, because I think the self-correction is usually to come together against an external threat. Like the very obvious thing would be, Putin is, an evil dictator who is doing a war of genocide in Ukraine that is oppositional to everything we stand for as Americans. And if you, this is one of the very few times I say that, if you're not oppositional to that, maybe you should find another country, like Russia, say, right? It's like, that is evil and terrible, and we should come together. We shouldn't be going, oh, this is a way we should play internal politics or other kinds of things. It should be those people are dying and suffering with artillery bombardment, and we should be going, it is great that one of, President Biden's accomplishments is pulling NATO together and helping those folks. That is great. And just using the external crisis. Now, the problem, of course, is we're in fractions. So as opposed to coming together in the external crisis and reforming an institutions and going, oh, well, you're not so bad, right? That evil person over there is the person that we should unite against. How do we get there? Look, I think we, roughly speaking, when you're in this kind of crisis, I think the thing that everyone has to think is if you're not part of the solution at getting us to try to come together again, then you're part of the problem. It's precisely the reason I like the work that you guys do here, precisely the reason why, I don't go on, many podcasts and so forth, but I'm here because it's really important to do this. And we you can't go, oh, they're going to do it. It's like, no, we are going to do it. I'm going to do it. And that's the only way I can possibly see through. But it's hard, by the way, because it's a collective action dilemma, and it's easy to be depressed, and it's easy to say it's not fixable. And it's like, well, okay, thanks. I'd actually rather revive our republic than, follow Rome down into the dustbin of history.
I want to ask just a couple other random AI things outside of the democracy space. One that I'm passionate about, music. I thought your chapter on music and art was super interesting. There was an example of a musician, I don't think you named them, who was very concerned about the threat from AI, and then was like, oh man, the experience of working with AI was so cool because, they're able to ask the AI to, give me a couple hooks, and now I'd have more options to choose from, and then I could riff on that. I thought that was a super interesting positive. My negative concern that I'm interested on your take on the whole picture is, maybe this means I'm an old guy now that and like times are passing me by, but I'm very concerned about looking into, like, my child is in high school in 10 years and the top 40 is not actually humans creating original art, but it's like Madonna AIs repackaged for another generation. And so to me, there's something very sad about that. And so I want you to kind of buck me up and just sort of talk about the questions facing the music and art world.
Well, so I have the following very strong belief that I have evidence to argue for, which is, look, what do human beings care about is other human beings kind of interacting. And so, for example, we have more people today watching chess matches than we've had any time in our past. And yet, there are no human chess players who are in the league of computers. And we don't watch computers playing with computers, right? Because we have a interest in that human connection.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we don't sometimes watch anime and other kinds of things, but
Sure.
I think that the human connection is also, look, I do think that it'll be amplified. You got the Paul McCartney doing the last kind of Beatles song, which is kind of cool and so forth. But I think ultimately it'll be the amplification of connections with human beings. And I think that's where, like, many of us kind of locate. It's one of the reasons why, like, one of the things I find entertaining is when a technologist come to me and say, I have this metaverse and we're all going to be talking to each other when we're avatars. And I'm like, no, I prefer this Teams Zoom environment where I can actually see people's faces. And I prefer it in person even much more, as part of that. And I think that's a general human thing. It doesn't mean that it'll be 100% of the time, but I think that will be there. And so, even as it gets better and better and becomes more and more of an amplifier, I think we go just, steam engine of mind, steam engine of music. It's like, okay, how do I then do even more amazing things with it? And so I have the conviction that we're there. I would find it disturbing if we all kind of go to our own little cubicle and go, okay, human beings go away and I live in my little fantasy metaverse thing. That would be disturbing. I just don't think it's actually a real possibility. I mean, look, X people, I found one. This person's doing it. Well, okay, if I won, who cares?
All right. Before we get out of this, do you want to talk about the speed and acceleration of AI change? Because this is one. I mean, I've been writing about AI stuff basically since the minute the first ChatGPT came out, and it struck me as the single most important. I've been saying this for a year now. We will look back and say the single most important thing in 2022 was the emergence of ChatGPT. It's that significant. Talk to me about why we shouldn't be afraid that the rate of acceleration, because as you said, this stuff changes month to month, is so fast as to make the medium-term future almost unknowable. Because I think we can see 2 to 5 years out. It seems hard to know what this looks like in 10 to 15 years.
And then it's hard to guard against, right? It's hard to do the stuff that you were talking about, which is to push back against the threats if it's moving so fast.
So I don't think it's all good that we're moving fast. There is some goodness, like the speed at which we get a medical assistant, a tutor, and every, 8 billion people on the planet, less than 1 billion have access to doctors, get the other 7 billion, kind of a medical assistant through smartphones, et cetera, et cetera. Like, all of that is a huge human suffering. The sooner that happens, the sooner that we get to completely autonomous vehicles. Like in the U.S., we say 40,000, up to 40,000, human fatalities, let alone injuries and all the rest per year. Like, all of that stuff is real important reason that there's benefits on speed. But obviously on the navigation of the landmines and other kinds of things, you go, I know how I'm going to drive safely. I'm going to double my speed. Yeah. Okay. That sounds a little foolish. And so it's not without its cost. Unfortunately, I think that the natural pacing of this, because if I know anything about human nature, it's we divide into groups and we compete. It's not just, sports teams or companies or industries, but countries and all the rest. And, this stuff is afoot. And I think because the better safety stuff exists in the future, if some people try to slow down and other people don't, the people trying to slow down in order to navigate the risk will be less navigated. You want the people who are concerned about the risk to be going as fast as everyone else is in order to be doing this. And so it's not like, oh no problems, close your eyes, hit the accelerator. Look, the accelerator is going to be what the accelerator is. There's some features and virtues for it, but and by the way, once we get there, I think there's all kinds of ways we can make the future more safe than now, but we're going to be navigating. And so that's why to pay attention to the questions and to navigate well as part of doing it. But it's that's the reason why the speed stuff, as I mentioned at the outset, is one of the things you've been writing about that I'm most sympathetic to, because I'm like, look, if you could wave a wand, if wishes were fishes, and just cause everybody to move at half speed of development while we're thinking about how to navigate the risks, that'd be great. But that's not the way the human beings work, and that's not the way the world works. So it's like, if wishes were fishes.
One more dystopia, and then we'll get to rapid fire. JVL mentioned the paperclip theory in a recent triad. I forget if it was on a podcast or in the book that you rejected outright the paperclip theory. So maybe I'll just let you kind of explain what that is and tell us why we shouldn't be worried that AI is going to kill us all.
So paperclip theory is fundamentally that you set AI some objective that seems totally innocuous, for example, making paperclips, and then in following that objective, it does heinous things, right? So it's like, oh, well, in order to make all these paperclips, I should get rid of all these human beings, right. In very broad brush. Obviously, there's
I need to use their teeth for the, paperclip, right?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. And so, part of the thing is that even if you were to set that for the vast majority of systems today, they just basically couldn't do anything. They're too brittle. It's not possible. Usually you get into this is when it's a super intelligence that's kind of running everything, is the kind of thing that you worry about. You would hope that if you had a super intelligence that was running things, which, by the way, we should be very careful to say, okay, we're going to let this thing run everything. By the way, be very careful about any one human being saying you're going to run everything too.
Right.
Right. Hopefully it would go, oh yeah, that paperclip thing, that's really stupid. I'm not going to do that. Because for example, part of how we, when we think about how do we design systems that are kind of like pro-human, is say, hey, tell us how you can elevate humanity, and tell us how you can, kind of help everyone. Tell us how you're going to avoid doing bad things, and hopefully, like, if we have credible belief that actually, in fact, how the system's working, that's part of how you get there. And so part of the reason why I think the paperclip theory is, I think it's almost like it's an on the spectrum simplification of what AI kind of functions, and it's a little bit like, it kind of goes back to like Dr. Strangelove. It's like, we're going to hook up the AI to determine when it should trigger all the nuclear bombs, and we're going to let it run by itself. You're like, who thinks that's a good idea?
A lot of steps. There's a lot of steps in there.
No, not really not.